I'm excited to preach this morning. This sermon series is a series that I feel like I shared with you in my video intro last week, how the idea came to me through a conversation with a friend in our church community. And I feel like God kind of dragged me into this sermon series. And then this week, as I was thinking about the first piece of it that I wanted to share with you, I thought, yeah, this is going to be good stuff. Lord, if you can help me to do it well, this is going to be good stuff. So, Father, we come before you this morning, the best we know how, with humble hearts, opening our hearts, and asking you to speak your word to us. Not just Bible verses, Lord, but your word. Your word to Fran Lehman. Your word to Chris Hadabaugh. Your word to Lisa Salazar. Your word to Bill Inman. Your word to Penny Hellenhaus. Your word to Jason and Amy Altenburn. Lord, speak your word to us. Your word of truth and love and freedom about our lives. And give us ears to hear. And help us to just find that sense of anticipation about what it means that you came to give us life. You said that, Lord. I have come that they might have life and might have it to the full. We want to know. We want to know. So good morning again. It is good to be back with you in person. Hope you didn't mind my kind of doing the video thing last week. But it's good to be back. We were out in New York with our daughter Joanna's family. We brought some of them back with us. Our wonderful little 4-year-old grandson Manu, which is short for Emmanuel, and our 9-year-old granddaughter Esther, who are here with us, and we've been having lots of fun. We've been going to the splash pad and riding the paddle boats, and we had a campfire and made s'mores, and staying up past our bedtimes, all that kind of stuff. So it's been good. So I introduced this new series to you last week called Finding Joy Together. And what I want to do in this series is I want to really try to unpack some of the things that prevent us from building loving and lasting relationships. Now, that could be anything. That could be friendship, marriage, neighbor, your brother and sister, even adult brothers and sisters, your parents, extended family members. You have all kinds of relationships. So this is not about one kind of relationship. It's about what is it that gets in the way of us building loving and lasting relationships. So this morning I want to start by reading to you a passage from Matthew's Gospel. And it goes like this. I'm going to skip a little bit in a couple of places, but starting in the beginning of Matthew 23, just because it's a long passage. Then Jesus spoke to the multitudes and to his disciples, saying, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, observe it and do it. But do not do what they do. Do what they say, not what they do. For they bind heavy burdens, hard to bear, and they lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. But all their works they do to be seen by men. They make their phylacteries broad and enlarge the borders of their garments." These were their religious vestments. They make them big. "They love the best places at the feast, the best seats in the synagogues, and they love to be greeted in the marketplace and to have people say to them, 'Oh, Rabbi, Rabbi.'" That's why sometimes there's some of you who just can't get past calling me pastor. I say, "Call me Fran." "But you do not be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, the Christ, and you are all brothers. Do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father, who is in heaven. And do not be called teachers, for one is your teacher, the Christ. But he who is greatest among you shall be your servant, and whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. For you neither go into it yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense you make long prayers. Therefore you will receive greater condemnation. And then later on he says in verse 23, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you tithe off of the mint and the anise and the cumin in your gardens, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, which are justice and mercy and faith. As the passage goes on, what I found interesting as I was rereading it this week is that it starts out, it says Jesus talking to disciples and the multitudes. But then he goes on and he addresses all these woes. Theologians call them the woes of Matthew 23. And they're all addressed to the Pharisees. And what you begin to realize is, oh, there are Pharisees in the crowd. Jesus starts out, he's kind of talking to everybody. Then he kind of narrows in and he says, so, you Pharisees, woe to you because, The things Jesus is addressing are all religious, right? They all relate to things of faith because this was a very religious culture, and Jesus is trying to straighten out what people think about God and what to do with God in their lives. But what I want to say to you this morning is, I think if we think too religiously about the passage, which seems to be all about religion, we'll actually miss the deeper thing that's actually going on, the very human thing that's going on. Because what Jesus is actually trying to reveal is not just the bad things the Pharisees do, but why they do them. And from that vantage point, what I want you to see is that we could be talking about anything. Not just Jesus was addressing religious things the Pharisees were doing to make themselves big, to make themselves important, to think that they were important. But we could be talking about anything that people do in life, in relationships, with their friends, on their social media. So what are these? Well, they do all their works, verse 5, to be seen by people. They make their phylacteries broad and enlarge the borders of their garments. They love the best places at the feasts, the best seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted and honored in the marketplace. To feel important, to have value, to have power. I mean, why else does Jesus say in verse 12, he who exalts himself will be humbled, but he who is humble will be exalted. There's one word Jesus uses in this diatribe that I think is very telling. In verse 16, he calls the Pharisees blind guides. Blind. Jesus is not just saying to them, you guys do some bad stuff and I'm correcting that. Jesus is saying to them, there are some really big things that you don't even see. So, many years ago, long before Linda and I and a small group of people began this church community, in the church community that we were a part of, which was kind of on the Naperville-Bolingbrook border, and we were part of that church for over a decade. And I was involved in leadership there in various ways. I was on this journey toward becoming a pastor. And I was going through some shifts in my thinking about what God is after, about the Christian journey, what's really at the heart of it. And one day I was in a conversation with a few guys who were also leaders in the church community. And we must have been, I don't remember exactly how we got to this part of the conversation, but we must have been in some conversation about people growing spiritually. You know, we Christians, we talk about that stuff all the time, right? People, what it means to grow, how people are growing, what you need to do to grow, all those kind of things. We're talking about people growing spiritually. And at one point, I had kind of come to a place in my life where I was really struggling with I guess what today I would call sort of like surface Christianity, mechanical Christianity. Like, there's Jesus, you better believe in him, here's the Christian rules, you better live them. This is what Christianity is. And I was struggling with that, in part because I didn't see it really changing people. I didn't really see it making, like Paul talks about the new man, and he talks about the fruits of the Spirit. I didn't really see it making new people out of people and bringing out those kinds of deeper fruits that Paul describes. And so I had been hungry, and I guess God had brought me to a place of openness to think about the Christian life in a different way, perhaps a deeper way. And one of the things that I had been drinking deeply was a book by a Christian psychologist named Larry Crabb, and the book was called Inside Out. Some of you have probably heard of it. The whole title is Real Change is Possible if you start from the inside out. And it was really like challenging, because we'd been in kind of what I'll call kind of surface Christianity for quite a while. It was really challenging what I thought. So I'm in this conversation with these guys, and at one point when I thought it was appropriate, I said, well, I think maybe to really grow spiritually, we have to also do some self-reflection. That maybe growing in knowing God and growing in knowing ourselves have to go hand in hand, that there are things we need to see and understand within ourselves that we haven't seen and understood, and maybe we need both of those. Maybe we need this part of kind of some self-reflection and some self-awareness and whatever. I thought it sounded pretty good. I thought, having recently read a bunch of Larry Crabb, that I sounded rather wise. And one of the guys in the group, whose name was Ron, immediately said, absolutely not. He said, now you have to remember too, this is like it's around 1990, 1991 maybe, I don't know, somewhere in there. And this was still a season when Christians, especially very theologically conservative Christians, were very suspicious about psychology in general. Psychology was of the devil, so, self-reflection was of the devil. And so, you think I'm exaggerating, but I'm not, yeah. And so he says, absolutely not. He says, Ron says, self-reflection will only lead to narcissism and further self-absorption. So I just took all my Larry Crabb self-reflective thoughts and I put them in my pocket, and I was kind of like, okay, shut down, got it, But I remember in the moment realizing that this was a watershed question. Because if Ron was right, I was going down a road that would lead me away from Christ and into being a more self-absorbed person. But if I was right, then Ron and most human beings were flying blind as bats and would remain stunted in their spiritual, emotional, and relational health as human beings unless they escaped whatever blindness they were suffering from. I was right. You can chuckle. I was right. But the reason I can say that with so much confidence in the middle of a sermon drawing off Holy Scripture is because Jesus and the Bible talk about these things. But we read the Bible with lenses, all of us. And so if our lenses say, no, life and Christian faith are just about the obvious things, the things you can observe, not the things that are harder to observe in yourself or in others. If Christianity and life are just about the obvious things, then what you believe about God, how you behave, which Bible translation you prefer, if it's just about those things, if that's what your lenses say, then you're going to miss a lot. Jesus said this, the eye is the lamp of the body. If how you see things is good, your whole life will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole life will be full of darkness. So if what you think is light is darkness, that is massive darkness. So if you're living life on the surface, you're not very aware of this in you or in other people, and you say, I think I have a pretty good beat on things, Jesus would say, you're lost as a goose in a hailstorm. And in John 9, we hear Jesus say, "For this I came into the world, that the blind may see, and that those who claim to see may be revealed as blind." Do you hear all this talk of blindness? When David prays in Psalm 139, "Search me, O God, and see if there is any evil way in me," he's not praying that because God doesn't know. Like, "Hey, God, maybe you better take a look. I know you don't really know what's going on inside me. Maybe you better check it out, see if there's anything, evil in me, or what my motives are, or my intents." David's praying that because David needs to know. He's saying, "God, search me and show me, because I need to see." In Psalm 51, after that whole messy business with Bathsheba and that deal, when David finally repents, he says to God, "Surely you desire truth in the inner places." So this was Larry Crabb's analogy. I once went and spent 5 days in a conference with this Christian psychologist, Larry Crabb, when I was first, 1991, 2, before we planted this church, when I was first trying to get a hold of like a heart-oriented Christianity. Which maybe to a lot of you, you're like, is there any other kind? Well, it was new for me, let me tell you. And I went and and he gave this analogy of an iceberg. And he said, above the waterline is what you are most aware of about yourself, and above the waterline is what you see of other people's lives. So this is like what people say, what I say, how we behave, how we react. This is the obvious stuff. Below the waterline is the things that we often don't see, often aren't aware of, both in ourselves and others. These would be things like our longings. You don't walk in here on Sunday morning, or I don't know, where you work, or walk around the mall. Nobody goes to the mall anymore, do they? Anyway, but you do, Crystal? All right. That's why they're still in business. So you don't walk in places and say to everybody, "Hey, can I just share with you my deeper longings that I never tell anybody?" But they're in you. So your longings, your fears, your motives, this is the stuff I called my sermon this morning, "Below the Waterline." This is the stuff that's below the waterline, inside me and inside others. I certainly can't see it in you unless you reveal it. But all this talk of blindness, often I don't see these things or understand them fully within myself. And Larry Crabb taught me this verse, Proverbs 20, verse 5. "The purposes of a man's heart are like deep water, but a man of understanding draws them out." See, the thing about deep water is, we were just with the kids at the paddle boats up at the quarry in downtown Naperville, the old quarry, yesterday. And in the deep part of the water, you look and you see a couple of feet, and then it just kind of goes dark. But when you get over toward the edge where there's rocks and logs and stuff, you go, "Oh, I can see all the way to the bottom," because in the shallow water, it's easy to see all the way to the bottom. But the deep water, you can't see everything. And the psalmist says, the purposes of a man's heart, the things inside a person, they're like deep water. It's not easy to see everything. But he says, but a man of understanding, he's trying to see, he's trying to draw them out. What the heck's down there? I'm going to tell you something that I think in the present state of Christianity in America is more important than at any time in my Christian journey. Are you ready? Any kind of Christianity that treats you like a shallow creature, by which I mean it says to you, just believe in Jesus and obey these rules and launch these Bible verses at all the people you disagree with. Any kind of, or maybe that offers you too many Christian quick fixes. Any kind of Christianity that treats you like a shallow creature, run from it. Run, 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 Forrest, run. Because it's not going to do you any good. Those Christians always sound like they're serious about sin because they're the ones talking about rules and disobedience, and they sound so serious about sin, but in the words of Jeremiah, they dress the wound of my people as though it were not serious. The depth of the wound is that the fears that drive all our bad behaviors, no, let's be more specific, the fears that drive all the ways we hurt each other are not out here. They're in here. The stuff that's moving me is in here, just like the stuff moving that iceberg is not the part you see. The big part is underneath. Fears. What did Adam say? I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. What are we afraid of? That we don't matter? That we aren't important? Oh, this is a huge one. We never want to admit it. Makes us feel like we're in junior high again. We're afraid that we don't belong. We're afraid that we'll just keep getting hurt like we've been hurt before. We're sometimes afraid that other people will never have to own the things that they've done. They hurt us and they just seem to have gotten off scot-free. We're afraid that survival is maybe as good as it gets. We're afraid that we won't ever find real joy. And what do we long for? We long for the opposite. We long to know that we matter to people, that we have some purpose, some significance in this life. We long to have joy. We might not have the words for it, but I think we long to not be broken, to not be disintegrated, but to be integrated, to be whole people. Most of all, I think underneath all these things, I honestly think, which is why I think the New Testament just can't shut up about it, I think we long to be loved. So, in this season of my life where, I'm reading Larry Crabb books, and Larry Crabb's saying, you got to get to know your iceberg underneath the waterline, and it's about the heart, and it's Jesus says to the Pharisees in this same set of passages in the Matthew 20-somethings, he says, you guys got to clean the inside of the cup and dish. The outside then will take care of itself. Think about that, right? So I'm in this season where I'm thinking about the heart, and I'm digesting all this stuff, and I'm in a church where it's all above the waterline, right? And so I'm having this, spiritual dissonance, and I'm realizing, in fact, right before we planted this church, you know what the last thing those guys said to me? Don't leave and plant a church. Stay here, and in the next 6 months, we'll create a full-time staff position for you to be on the staff of this church. And I thought, I don't want to be on the staff of a church that's all above the waterline. So I'm thinking through all these things. Linda and I are having endless conversations. I'm driving to Indianapolis to be like this with Larry Crabb for 5 days. Talk to me about what it really is, all this stuff. And he's teaching everybody all behavior has a goal. In other words, you might not see why you do things, but you do things for a reason. You just don't always see it. You don't always know your own motives. So he invites us to ask God to show us our hearts. That's a very dumb prayer. Let me tell you. That's a very dangerous prayer. Hey, God, show me. So I say, Lord, apparently, now you got to remember, I have no clue what I don't see about myself at this point. I've been up on the surface. I'm the Bible answer man. I look confident to everybody, even though a lot of that was a ruse. And I'm like, God, like what was the game show? Like, show me my heart, God. Why do I do what I do? So I start thinking about the things that I do, prayerfully, reflectively. Well, one of the things that I did, and some of you have heard me tell this story, but I haven't told it for a long time. I was a pretty insecure guy in the early years of my marriage to Linda. When we started dating, I thought, man, how did I fool her? She's smart. She's good looking. Like, what is she doing with me? I got no clue where I'm going in life, And we did both love Jesus, and we had that together, and we just marched off, together with all of that. But one of the ways my insecurity came out, but I didn't know it, was that in the early years of our marriage, I would tell her I loved her like, I don't know how you remember it. In my mind, it was like, 12 times a day. I love you. I love you. And you know what I thought about that? I'm just the most loving guy there is. Like she's so lucky I love her so much, God, show me my heart. God, show me? You say I love you to your wife so much because you need her to say, I love you too. And you need her to say, I love you too, to assuage all those deep insecurities inside you. And when I saw that, I was like, OMG. That's it? my motive is this fear. And when I really uncovered it, was a fear. Here was the honest fear. This is embarrassing to say, but I'm going to tell you, because I think our spiritual growth starts with our honesty. Really, the deepest part of that fear was that one day she was going to wake up and realize that she'd married a nothing, and that would be the day she left. That's what was under there. And I had to face it. And it was not a lot of fun. The other interesting thing the Lord showed me, and I could give you a whole list, but this is the other big one, is I sometimes say, back in my 20s, I was in early 30s, I was kind of the Bible answer man. I never felt that significant as a teenager and as a young man. And when I got a hold of the Bible, and people said to me, man, you want to be the top-notch, smart, got it all together Christian, this book has, what does John Goodman say in Oh Brother Larry? He says, I sell the Bible, every blessed word, the book that's got all the answers right here, right? So all of a sudden I had all the answers, and man, I learned the book. And I became the guy who could win every argument about the Bible and theology. Now, I was wrong about a lot of stuff, but I still won the arguments because I was forceful, right? And the Lord showed me that the reason that was so important to me is because it was the thing I'd latched onto to feel like I was really somebody. Boy, that almost makes me like a Pharisee, right? Now I got a religious thing that makes me really a somebody. And I love the Scripture, but I never see its connection to my soul that way anymore. It doesn't make me something because I know a Bible verse you don't know. That doesn't mean anything. We have the right longings, but too many fears, and they result in bad strategies. Those Pharisees wanted to know that they mattered. They wanted to feel important. They probably even found some love, if you want to call it that, in that tight, rigid, judgmental, us versus them community, right? We long for belonging, don't we? And so a lot of times when we find a group we can belong to that will take us, even if that group is built around all these nutty things, or unseemly things, or whatever it is, we'll join because we say, man, I got a group, and I can buy into this stuff, and, I'm really on the inside now. But when we're doing that, do we see that what we're really longing for is just belonging? That we're really longing to feel like our life has some significance? Jesus' invitation is to bring our dark fears into the light, to be honest about them, because when we are honest about them, something different becomes possible. And that, I think, is so crucially important. When we get honest about them, and we want to see it, and we want it to be better than it is, something different actually becomes possible. Here's an example. Most anger, in my opinion, is fear in disguise. So that's actually another Larry Crabbism. Most anger is fear in disguise. So we are afraid that someone is abandoning us, so we get angry with them. Or we're afraid that someone is blaming us, and that they're saying, therefore, we're a bad person, or we're unworthy, or we're not smart, and so we get angry at them. Or we're afraid that someone is blocking something that we see as essential to our happiness. That starts when we're little kids, and mom says no. We go, oh, I got to have that treat on the grocery store shelf to be happy. And mom says no, and so we get angry. And in all these fears, we lash back in our anger. Jesus comes along and says, blessed are those who get angry and lash out. Oh no, that isn't actually quite it, is it? He says to us, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Now the word that is translated, people translate that word, comforted, probably says comforted in your Bible, might say something else. Bible translators translate that word differently as they bring it in English, because if you translate it just kind of literally from the Greek, it's a little weird. Because the Greek word that's translated comforted, it's a word, it's a compound word in Greek, parakaleo. Para means with or alongside, and kaleo means to call. So this is literally what Jesus says. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be called alongside. Let it sink in for a minute. You see, when you aren't bringing the real you, what's really in you, to God, there's not much that God can do because He's not really interested in tweaking the false self that I've created. He's not really interested in tweaking that false self that I've created to feel important or to get love on my terms or to finagle out of people what I think I need. But when I get underneath all that stuff and I see, oh, I'm afraid. I'm afraid my wife doesn't love me. I'm afraid my friend is rejecting me. I'm afraid this person is saying I'm not competent. I've been told that a few times as a pastor over the years. I'm afraid of all these things. When I come to God and in the quiet place with God and I say, oh God, I realize now I'm afraid. Father, I'm mourning the things that have happened to me and the fears that it's created in me and the dumb things that I've done along the way in response to these things to try to find importance and love and joy. And when I bring it to God that way, the Lord says, I get it. I made you, so I know you, so I know how to heal you, so let me come alongside you because I can take you somewhere better. Blessed are those who mourn. I would almost insert, instead of becoming angry, there's a place for righteous anger over certain things, but that's not most of our anger. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be called alongside. God says, oh, now that you're opening it up and you're looking at it and you're being honest and you want to see it, God's like, now we can go somewhere. Man, now we can really go somewhere. Now we can really do something that's going to change you. If we can take this journey of seeing ourselves, where will it take us? I don't want to end this message without being a little bit more specific. What will we be healed from? Well, we might get healed from reacting out of feelings that we don't completely understand, which we do often. We react out of feelings that we haven't really thought through. Like, when you get mad, really honestly, the first thing you should ask is, so what am I afraid of here? Recently, two of my siblings, my physical siblings in the family I grew up in, had the biggest row of their lives. They have a row from time to time, but they had the biggest one they've ever had. And one of them became very, very angry, and the words he said are toothpaste that will be hard to put back in the tube and may take years. He was actually really afraid. I know that because I know him. And the way it came out was in anger and harshness. He needed to mourn. He needed to look at the fears and say, wow, this is hard. This is hard, God, and it makes me afraid, and it makes me sad. And then God would say, okay, so bring that to me, and let's do something with it. And one of the byproducts would have been, he wouldn't have screamed at my sister and said all those things that'll be hard to take back in any short order. So maybe we'll get healed from reacting out of a feeling, the roots of which we don't really understand. Maybe we'll get healed from making anger our big response to someone or to some situation when the root feeling is really sadness. Maybe we'll get healed from being blind to our own motives. Oftentimes we have these motives of getting someone to do what is going to be fulfilling to us. That's what we mean when we say selfishness most of the time. Or the motive of making ourselves, all the time I see people making themselves. If you don't see it in yourself, you're probably not going to see it in other people. But when you start to see it in yourself, and believe me, I've done plenty of it. I've told you some of those stories this morning, like about being the Bible answer man. But when you start seeing the ways that you've tried to make yourself feel significant or feel important, you'll start to see it in others. And man, I see all around me all the time, people doing things to try to make themselves important, which is what they're really doing is they're really assuaging their fear of insignificance, their insecurity, and so they want to feel more powerful. Maybe we'll get healed. This is the fruit part of the sermon. This is the part where if you say, God, search my heart, show me what's in me. Give me the courage to bring it to you. Help me be honest and mourn instead of just being angry or, whatever. Then what might happen is we might become aware of the impact of our manner or our relational style with other people. Have you ever seen that person who's really abrasive? And you said, man, do they not see it? You know what the answer to that is, right? No, they don't. But when you begin to see the things of the heart, you begin to see the afraid, you begin to see that people are doing all these things out of their fears, then maybe you begin to say, oh, so how do I once in this church, and if you're really courageous, you could do this. I'm not telling you to do this. But once in this church, I asked people, I said, I want you to go home and I want you to ask your husband and or your kids this week, if you're married, or if not, some of your good friends. I want you to ask them this question. What's it like to be in relationship with me? The good and the tough. Woo! There's a question. Honestly. And you have to say, and I won't get mad at you. Otherwise, they're not going to tell you the truth. Right? But do you realize how different all our relationships would be if we were aware of the impact of our relational style, the ruts we have learned to travel in from the inside out to our behaviors with other people, and how that impacts our relationships, how it makes people stand at a distance, or whatever it does. Now, some of you will hear this sermon, and you don't need it that much, because you're very aware of your inner life, and you've been on this journey of becoming more aware for years, maybe. This journey of knowing your own soul. But some of you don't think you need it. Either because you think probably because you think you don't have any of this stuff. That might be one reason. I don't have any of that stuff. My heart's good, thank you, It's like the guy that goes to the doctor, and the doctor says, we got some serious stuff to talk about. And the patient says, great to see you, doc, and he's out the door. Or it could be that you very quickly say to yourself, oh yeah, I've thought about some of these things in my life. I've crossed those bridges. Yep, check. Done it. You're the ones who are in danger. That's not a judgment on my part. That's not a threat. You're in danger of your spiritual, emotional, and relational life being stuck. Because you don't want to see the things that could be in the way that come from within you of building loving and lasting relationships. So here's the thing. Everyone is different with this stuff. Human beings are fearfully and wonderfully made. I mean, we are all so unique. And we're unique you've heard the phrase nature and nurture, right? So we're unique in terms of our nature, how we were made. We're just wired differently, I like Hadabah over here, but he's wired way differently from me. When we're down in Haiti together, we get out in the sort of jungly part of things, and I'm like, I'd wander to the wrong side of the island. I'm like, where are we? I don't know. And Hadabah's like, you go here, hang a left at that trail, boom, look at that tree, boom. I'm like, you're wired weird, but I'm glad because now we're not lost. So we're all wired differently in terms of nature, personality, abilities, all those things, but we've also had a different nurture experience. We've had different journeys of life. We've grown up in different families. Our wounds are different, and the good things and the places we've been successful and happy. So everybody's got a different recipe. So I think that's why we need the Holy Spirit to help us with this journey. When I said to the Lord all those years ago, so Lord, apparently there's some stuff, I'm being told, this guy says there's some stuff that I don't see. So could you help me out with that? And the Lord is like, I know you, Fran, better than the back of my own hand. And I can unfold your heart to you. And he did. See, I can't do that. I don't know all the ins and outs. I don't know what you're afraid of, how you've been wounded. I don't know all your relational ruts and, all this stuff. Now, you can get some help from some honest friends. But I think the encouraging thing to me is that the Lord, in fact, can really help us with this journey. And you say, well, Pastor Fran, where does that journey go? Where does it ultimately take us? I mean, once we see all this stuff, and we're not just being angry people in denial anymore, or whatever it is we've become, or withdrawn people, the symptoms can look very different. And we start to want to see this, and we come to God and say, hey, I want to see it, and I want you in here, and let's work on it. And God comes and says, okay, he comes alongside and says, all right, let's go for a walk, and we can do some new things. What's going to happen? And we'll talk about this more in this series. Then what's going to happen at that point? Well, here's what's going to happen, is that in place of those things that you built in your soul and latched onto in your soul to survive and to make life work, in place of those, God is going to put into your soul, out of the riches of His gracious love, better things that will cause you not to feel so much like you need the former things that you lived from and the ways that you traveled in here. There's a beautiful verse in 1 Corinthians 2, and I'm going to end with this verse, that talks exactly about this. That talks about the power of coming to know what is being given to us instead of all of what we have held on to. This is what it says. Now, brothers and sisters, we have received, we who have come to Jesus and opened our hearts, we have received not the spirit of the world, right? All this other stuff we do, that's what everybody does. We've not received the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God. You got to hear this. So that we might know. Let me put a couple other adjectives in there. So that we might see and understand and take hold of the things which God has freely given us. The better stuff. Lord, how beautiful is your love. Lord, I'm grateful that you've made us deep creatures and not shallow creatures, even though sometimes it's frustrating because it's hard to see what we don't see. And we freely admit the journey, this kind of a journey is not, in some ways a shallow journey is easier, Lord. But this journey with you, where you take us into our own being and you help us to find that new life in there, this leads to love. This leads to joy. And I am so wildly grateful for that. And I pray that you would just help each of my beautiful brothers and sisters here this morning to just grab some little nugget out of what we've talked about and say, that's the thing I need to think about. And kind of bring it to you, Lord, and say, Holy Spirit, work your magic in me.